Now that's cute. You really think you're in charge here? It was a crowded Friday night. Two black twin sisters, Danielle and Dominique Carter, found themselves harassed, threatened and arrested by power-tripping, drunk, off-duty cops at a local bar. Mocked for their looks, treated like outsiders, and manhandled in front of silent onlookers. They were paraded like easy prey, women to humiliate, victims with no power to fight back. But those officers had no idea who they were cuffing. Before this night, the Carter sisters had faced harder battles, forged by years of experience as FBI agents. The cops thought they were breaking two women. In truth, they were lighting the fuse to their own downfall. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The bar's usual Friday chatter went silent as Danielle Carter locked eyes with Sergeant Rick Dalton, his bloodshot gaze meeting hers. The overhead light caught the badge still clipped to his belt, a sharp reminder of the power he carried, even off-duty and drunk. "I said back off," Danielle repeated, her voice steady and firm. She stayed seated, but straightened her back, refusing to show fear. Rick's smirk widened. He leaned closer, the smell of whiskey heavy on his breath. "Or what, sweetheart? You gonna make me?" His massive frame loomed over their table, casting a shadow across the sisters' faces. Officer Mark Stevens chuckled, a low, mean sound. He moved behind Dominique's chair and placed his thick hands on the backrest. "We're just being friendly. Don't they teach manners where you girls come from?" Dominique's fingers tightened around her glass, but her face stayed calm. She glanced toward Luis behind the bar, who was pretending to clean the same spot over and over, his jaw tight as he watched everything unfold. The youngest officer, Kyle Boyd, swayed slightly, his words slurred. "Check out those curves," he said, making a crude hourglass shape with his hands. "You two must be twins. Double the chocolate, right, Sarge?" Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A woman at the bar quietly grabbed her purse and slipped out the door. The music faded, leaving only the heavy tension in the air. "Last warning," Danielle said, her dark eyes locked on Rick. "Walk away while you still can." Rick grabbed an empty chair from a nearby table, dragging it across the floor with a loud screech. He spun it around and straddled it backward, getting far too close to Danielle. "Now that's cute. You think you're in charge here?" he said, then looked over his shoulder at the others. Ladies seem to have forgotten whose town this is. Mark's hands slid from Dominique's chair to her shoulders. She went still, her face hardening like stone. "Don't touch me," she said quietly, each word sharp and clear. "Or what?" Mark mocked, squeezing her shoulders. "You gonna call the police?" All three officers laughed at his joke. Luis appeared beside their table, holding a tray of empty glasses like a shield. "Gentlemen, maybe we should—" "Shut it, Luis," Rick snapped without looking at him. "Go back to washing dishes before I decide to check your papers again." Luis's face flushed red, but he stood his ground. "Sergeant, I don't want any trouble in my bar." Kyle stumbled forward, bumping the table and spilling the sisters' drinks. "Then tell these stuck-up—" "Choose your next word carefully," Dominique cut in, her voice like ice. "Oh yeah?" Kyle leaned down, his face inches from hers. "Or what? What are you gonna do about it, beautiful? Dressed like that, you're basically asking for attention." Danielle's hand inched toward her purse, but Dominique caught her eye and gave a small shake of her head. "Not yet." Rick noticed the exchange and grinned. "Got something in that purse you want to share with the class, princess?" "Just my lipstick," Danielle said smoothly, "though I doubt it's your shade." Mark's grip on Dominique's shoulders tightened. "You know what your problem is? No respect for authority. But we can fix that, can't we, boys?" A young man at a corner table pulled out his phone and started recording, trying to be discreet. Kyle noticed and started toward him, but Rick's sharp whistle stopped him. "Later," Rick said. Then he turned back to Danielle, his smile gone. "Here's what's gonna happen. You two are gonna apologize for your attitude, buy us a round of drinks, and maybe, if you ask real nice, we'll forget about this little show of disrespect." Danielle took a slow sip of her drink, then set the glass down carefully. "Here's what's actually gonna happen. You're gonna take your hands off my sister, step back and leave us alone. Because right now you're making a very big mistake." "That sounded like a threat," Rick said, his voice dropping low. Mark, Kyle, did you hear a threat? Sure did, Sarge, Kyle said quickly. Definitely threatening an officer, Mark agreed, his fingers digging deeper into Dominique's shoulders. Rick's grin turned cruel. Now that's a serious offense. Might have to take you ladies downtown. Teach you some manners. The sisters exchanged a silent glance, a conversation built over a lifetime of trust and training. The air in the bar was tight, ready to snap. The three officers closed in, forming a circle around the sisters' table. Rick's eyes roamed over them with open hunger, lingering on their legs. Would you look at that? He drawled, nudging Kyle. Twins really do share everything, even their taste in outfits. Dominique's face didn't move, but her jaw tightened. She'd met men like this all her life, first in community outreach, then at the bureau. Men who only felt powerful by making others small. Those hips, though, Kyle said, licking his lips. Bet you girls can dance real good. He started swaying his hips in a crude imitation. Mark laughed, his breath hot on Danielle's neck. What do you say, ladies? Give us a little show. You're dressed for it and all. The few remaining patrons stared at their drinks, pretending not to see. Luis had vanished behind the bar, probably calling for help. But the sisters knew better than to expect backup in a town ruled by men like these. Back up, Danielle warned, her voice cutting through the silence. You're drunk and you're making fools of yourselves. Rick's face twisted. Making fools of ourselves? He gestured at their outfits. You come in here dressed like that, shaking what your mama gave you, and we're the fools? Our clothes aren't an invitation, Dominique said quietly, but her voice was steel. And your badge isn't a license to harass women. Harass? Rick laughed, an ugly sound. Honey, if you didn't want attention... He moved fast, surprisingly fast for a drunk man, and smacked Dominique on the backside. The sound echoed through the bar like a gunshot. His laughter followed, loud, cruel, disgusting. Dominique shot up from her chair, her face burning with rage and humiliation. You son of a... Danielle lunged forward, but Mark slammed into her, pinning her against the wall. The air rushed from her lungs as his forearm pressed across her collarbone. What's the matter? Rick taunted, standing too close to Dominique. Can't take a compliment from an officer of the law? He reached for her again, but Dominique slapped his hand away. Touch me again, she warned, her voice trembling with fury, and you'll pull back a stump. Kyle giggled and pulled out his handcuffs, the metal clinking in the tense air. Ooh, now that's definitely a threat against an officer. Around them, people stared into their drinks, pretending not to notice. A middle-aged couple near the door quickly gathered their things and left. Nobody wanted to see what was coming next. Nobody wanted to be the next target. Someone's getting awful hostile, Mark said, pressing harder against Danielle's chest. Maybe we should take this somewhere private. Teach you ladies some respect. Danielle struggled against his grip, her training screaming to fight back, to protect her sister. But she forced herself to stay still, knowing that one wrong move now could spiral everything into disaster. Rick stepped closer to Dominique, using his height to loom over her. His breath reeked of whiskey and arrogance as he growled, Let me explain something real clear. This is my town. He jabbed a finger into her chest. My streets. Another jab. My rules. Kyle jingled the handcuffs again, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. And rule number 1, he slurred. You don't talk back to cops, especially not when we're being so nice, Mark added, his free hand moving to stroke Danielle's hair. She jerked her head away, but his fingers tangled painfully in her curls. Rick circled Dominique like a shark, eyes locked on her body. See, we could have had a real good time, he said mockingly. Could have shown you girls some real southern hospitality. His hand shot out, grabbing Dominique's wrist when she tried to step away. But now you've gone and hurt our feelings. Luis appeared at the edge of the scene, his face pale but determined. Sergeant Dalton, please, they're customers. Did I stutter before, Luis? Rick's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. One more word from you, and Ice will be real interested in that back room of yours. Luis's mouth snapped shut, his hands curling into helpless fists at his sides. Smart man, Rick sneered, turning back to Dominique. He twisted her wrist until she gasped. "Now you're gonna learn what happens when you disrespect officers in my town." Kyle stepped forward eagerly, handcuffs raised. "Want me to do the honors, Sarge?" "Ladies first," Rick said, yanking Dominique closer. He leaned in until his lips nearly touched her ear. "You don't talk back to cops in my town." Kyle moved behind Dominique with practiced ease, roughly yanking her arms back. The handcuffs snapped shut around her wrists with a metallic click that echoed through the silent bar. Her breath hitched as the cold steel bit into her skin. Kyle tightened them deliberately. Too tight. "Not so high and mighty now, are you?" he sneered, shoving Dominique down. Her knees hit the sticky floor hard, sending pain shooting through her legs. The sharp smell of spilled beer and decades of grime filled her nose. Mark had Danielle pinned face first against the wall, her cheek pressed against the rough wood paneling. She felt splinters dig into her skin as he twisted her arms behind her back. Rick hummed, circling them like a vulture. "All that sass, all that confidence means nothing when you're in cuffs." His eyes roamed over their bodies again, lingering where their shorts had ridden up from the struggle. "Should have played nice when we gave you the chance." Dominique's shoulders burned from the painful angle Kyle held her in. She could feel every pair of eyes in the bar, some staring, others pretending not to. The humiliation burned hotter than the pain. These drunk bullies weren't just arresting them, they were putting on a show. "Please," Luis's voice cracked as he stepped forward, hands raised. "They haven't done anything wrong. Let me call them a cab." Rick turned on him in 2 quick strides, grabbing Luis by the collar and shoving him hard against the bar. "You say one more word, and I'll have this whole place shut down faster than you can say health code violation." His voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "How many illegals you got working in that kitchen, Luis? How many fake papers?" Luis's face went pale. His hands trembled as he backed away. But Dominique caught a small movement. He'd slipped his phone deeper into his apron pocket. The red recording light blinked faintly. "That's what I thought," Rick sneered, turning back to his prey. A woman at a nearby table raised her phone, trying to record. Kyle spotted the movement and lunged forward, snatching it from her hand. "No cameras!" he barked, throwing it down. The screen shattered, glass and plastic scattering across the floor. The woman flinched, eyes wide with fear. Mark laughed, using his free hand to pat Danielle down roughly. "Gotta make sure they're not hiding anything dangerous," he said, his touch lingering far too long at her hips, sliding up her sides. "Could be weapons anywhere in these tight little outfits." Danielle jerked against his grip, earning herself a harder shove against the wall. "Stay still," Mark growled in her ear, "unless you want to add resisting arrest to the charges." "Charges?" Dominique demanded from the floor. "What charges? We haven't done anything." Rick crouched in front of her, grabbing her chin roughly. "Disorderly conduct, disturbing the peace, threatening an officer." His thumb brushed across her lower lip. "Maybe assault, depending on how cooperative you decide to be." Dominique yanked her face away, disgust flashing across her expression. Kyle responded by pulling her arms higher behind her back, making her gasp in pain. "Get them up," Rick ordered, straightening. "Time for a ride downtown." Mark hauled Danielle away from the wall, while Kyle jerked Dominique to her feet. The sisters were shoved toward the door, stumbling in their captor's grip. The remaining patrons parted like water, creating a clear path to the exit. No one made eye contact. No one spoke. The only sounds were the sisters' footsteps and the jingle of the officers' belts. "Such a waste," Rick said, holding the door open. "Could have been a fun night for everyone." He reached out to touch Dominique's hair as she passed, but she jerked away despite Kyle's painful grip. The night air hit them like a slap, humid and heavy. The parking lot's harsh fluorescent lights cast long shadows across the scene, making it feel unreal. A patrol car sat waiting, its presence suggesting this hadn't been as spontaneous as it looked. Mark shoved Danielle harder than necessary, making her trip. She barely caught her balance, her shoulders aching against the cuffs. "Careful there, sweetheart," he mocked. "Wouldn't want to add falling down drunk to your charges." Through the bar's windows, faces watched. Some worried, some curious, all silent. Luis stood in the doorway, his phone still recording from his apron pocket, his expression a careful mask of anger and fear. As they were marched toward the waiting patrol car, Dominique felt humiliation burn through her entire body. Every step on the cracked asphalt was an insult. Every shove from Kyle's hands was a violation. Her FBI instinct screamed to fight back, but her tactical mind knew now wasn't the time. Beside her, Danielle's voice came out in a low whisper, fierce and full of promise. They have no idea who they're messing with. As they reached the bar's exit, Dominique felt the metal cuffs biting into her wrists. Her shoulders ached from the strain, but her mind was sharp, calculating. Years of FBI training had prepared her for this. Moments when everything seemed lost, but opportunity hid in the smallest details. She twisted her hands behind her, fingers straining against the cuffs. Kyle's drunken focus was more on pushing her forward than watching her movements. With practiced control, she worked 2 fingers into her back pocket, feeling the smooth edge of her badge case pressed against her thigh. The leather was slick with sweat, making it harder to grip. Dominique bit her lip, fighting through the pain as she slid the case free, millimeter by millimeter, until finally it dropped. The badge case hit the wooden floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the tense silence. It landed face up, the golden shield catching the dim light. "Federal Bureau of Investigation," Dominique said clearly, her voice cutting through the air. Despite the bruise darkening her cheekbone, her tone was steady and commanding. Her eyes swept across the room, making sure everyone understood exactly what they were seeing. The patrons who had been avoiding eye contact now stared openly, phones appearing in trembling hands. The air seemed to thicken with realization. Danielle straightened, shrugging off Mark's loosened grip. She stood tall despite her bound hands, chin raised in defiance. "You're assaulting federal agents," she said coldly, her words sharp as blades. Her dark eyes locked on Rick's face as the truth hit him. For a second, Rick just stared at the badge. His flushed face froze in disbelief. Then, like a switch flipping, he burst out laughing, loud, forced, and ugly. "Well, ain't that cute?" he sneered, kicking the badge case, sending it skittering across the floor. "You think that fancy little card means anything here?" His voice dropped into a dangerous growl. "This is my town, my rules." He nodded at Kyle, who instantly tightened the cuffs around Dominique's wrists. The sharp metal bit into her skin, forcing a quick breath from her lips. She tried to stay composed, but Kyle leaned in close, his hot breath brushing her neck. "Should have kept that pretty mouth shut." Around them, the crowd shifted uneasily, and the faint sound of phones unlocking filled the tense air. Rick turned sharply toward the noise, his face darkening. "Anyone takes a picture," he warned, his tone cold and deliberate, "and they'll be joining these ladies downtown. Interfering with police business is a serious offense." His hand rested on his holstered gun, the message clear. Behind the bar, Luis moved carefully, his steps slow and deliberate. He leaned toward a regular sitting at the counter and whispered urgently, "Remember what you saw tonight. Remember everything." The man gave a faint nod, eyes glued to his drink. Mark grabbed Danielle's arm again, his fingers digging into her flesh, hard enough to bruise. "Let's go, FBI," he sneered, turning her title into an insult. "You can file a complaint from your cell." The sisters were shoved toward the door and out into the humid night. Harsh security lights cut across their faces, throwing long, sharp shadows across the pavement. The air smelled of metal and rain. The storm was close, just like the danger that hung over them. Rick followed behind, his boots scraping the asphalt. "You know what happens to cops who end up in jail?" he asked almost casually. "Same thing's gonna happen to you, federal scum. Worse probably." His voice carried a twisted satisfaction. Kyle pushed Dominique roughly into the back seat of the patrol car, not bothering to guard her head as it hit the doorframe. Pain flashed through her temple, but she stayed silent. Danielle was shoved in next, the door slamming shut behind them with a hard metallic thud. Through the window, they caught sight of Luis standing in the bar doorway, his jaw tight with anger and helplessness. His phone, still recording from his apron pocket, caught it all. Rick leaned into the driver's window. "Take the long way to the station," he said with a smirk. "Show our federal friends some local hospitality." The car engine roared to life. Streetlights swept through the interior like slow flashes of lightning, illuminating their faces one moment, hiding them the next. From the front seat came the muffled sound of cruel laughter. Danielle leaned closer to her sister and whispered, "They just declared war." Her voice trembled with fury, but her words carried a promise. At the station, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and cold. Rick and Kyle shoved the sisters down a narrow hallway, their footsteps echoing off scuffed linoleum floors. "Welcome to your new home," Rick sneered, his alcohol-soaked breath brushing against Danielle's neck. His grip tightened on her arm until her skin turned white. The booking area was nearly empty, only a weary desk sergeant sitting behind a counter, pretending not to see. The wall clock ticked slowly, 11:47 p.m. Kyle fumbled with the cell keys, still clumsy from drinking. "Ladies first," he mocked as he swung open the first cell. The door screeched like metal tearing apart. Dominique stumbled as Rick shoved her inside, her shoulder slamming into the wall. Without removing her cuffs, he slammed the door shut. The lock clicked hard, final. "I want my phone call," Dominique demanded, her voice sharp but steady. "It's our right." Rick leaned against the bars, smirking. "Rights? You don't have any here. This ain't your fancy FBI office." He turned to Kyle. "Put the other one in the next cell. Keep them apart." Kyle grabbed Danielle's arm, but she resisted. "This is illegal detention," she said, voice firm. "You're making it worse for yourselves." Her words earned her a rough shove that sent her sprawling onto the floor. "Shut your mouth," Kyle snapped, slamming the door behind her. "Before I give you something real to complain about." The sisters met each other's eyes through the bars. Dominique's expression was calm but burning, while Danielle's eyes blazed with quiet fury. They'd faced danger before, but this felt different, darker, personal. Rick sat at the desk, pulling out paperwork with exaggerated care. "Now let's see. What should we charge you with?" He began scribbling, each word dripping with malice. "Resisting arrest? Assaulting an officer. You did swing at Kyle, didn't you?" He winked at his partner. "That's a lie," Danielle snapped, gripping the cold bars. "There are witnesses." "Witnesses?" Kyle laughed. "Ain't nobody saw nothing, right, Rick?" Rick grinned, continuing to write. "Disturbing the peace, disorderly conduct, threatening an officer." Each word piled another false accusation onto their names. The sharp sound of shoes on tile broke the tension. Chief Darnell Holt entered, his silver hair perfect, his presence colder than the air itself. "Gentlemen," he said calmly, his voice low but commanding, "I hear we have some federal agents causing trouble in my town." He picked up Rick's half-finished paperwork, scanning it with a faint, knowing smile. Quite a list of infractions. Dominique stepped closer to the bars. "Chief Holt, your officers assaulted us, arrested us without cause, and are fabricating charges. We demand—" "You demand nothing," Holt interrupted smoothly, his tone still polite but laced with poison. He paced between the cells, hands clasped behind his back. "You know what's interesting? Outsiders come here thinking their fancy titles mean something. Thinking they can— what's the word? Investigate." He stopped in front of Danielle's cell, eyes cold and analytical. "Bad things tend to happen to people who push too hard in my town. People disappear. Paperwork gets lost. Charges multiply." His thin smile didn't reach his eyes. "Even FBI badges can't save you from that." The threat hung heavy in the air, thick and suffocating. Rick and Kyle smirked behind him, enjoying every second. "You can't intimidate us," Danielle said quietly, her tone steady. "We've dealt with corrupt cops before." "Corrupt?" Holt chuckled, the sound empty of warmth. "That's such an ugly word. I'd prefer to think of it as maintaining order, my order." He straightened his tie and continued, "You have a choice. Take the disorderly conduct charges, spend the night here, and leave town tomorrow quietly." Or he let the silence twist between them. "Or what?" Dominique asked sharply. You'll make us disappear? Add us to your list of victims? Victims? Holt raised an eyebrow in mock surprise. I don't see any victims. Just two drunk women who attacked my officers. That's what the paperwork will show. He handed the forms back to Rick. Finish processing them. By the book, our book. He gave them a final cold smile before walking out. Behind him, Rick and Kyle bent over their papers again, laughing softly as they filled in more lies. Danielle pressed closer to the bars separating her from her sister and whispered, her voice trembling but full of resolve. This isn't about us, Dominique said quietly, watching her sister's face under the harsh fluorescent light. It's about how many others they've buried. The hours crawled by like years. The station had grown silent. Only the occasional shuffle of footsteps or a distant phone ringing broke the stillness. The clock now read 2:13 a.m. The sisters had settled into a tense, watchful waiting game. Danielle paced her cell, 6 steps forward, 6 steps back, her bare feet cold against the concrete. Their shoes had been taken during processing, along with their phones and jewelry. Standard procedure, they were told. But nothing about this night felt standard. Dominique sat on the thin metal bunk, her back pressed against the wall, eyes fixed on the dim hallway. Neither sister had spoken much since Chief Holt's threat, but both minds were racing, cataloguing every face, every word, every detail. Soft footsteps approached. A young officer appeared, holding 2 paper bags and cups of water. Jenny Morales. They had noticed her earlier standing near the booking desk, discomfort clear in her tense shoulders and averted eyes. Dinner? She said loudly enough for anyone listening. Standard issue, sandwich and chips. As she stepped closer to Danielle's cell, her voice dropped to a whisper. Don't trust anyone here. This isn't the first time. Danielle took the bag, her fingers brushing Morales's hand. Something small slipped between them, a folded piece of paper. Without a change in expression, Danielle closed her hand and hid it. Morales turned to Dominique's cell, keeping up the pretense of routine. Water fountain's broken, she said at normal volume. Then quieter, they do this at least once a month, usually to black women passing through. Dominique accepted her meal with a defeated look. Thank you, officer, she said, slumping onto her bunk as if resigned to her fate. When Morales left, the sisters ate in silence. The food was stale, the chips even staler, but they forced it down. They needed strength. Danielle waited until she heard the faint sounds of a shift change before slipping the note under her blanket. A phone number was written in tight handwriting, followed by Emergency FBI Contact, Deputy Director Marcus Chen. They've done this before, Dominique murmured, barely audible. Multiple victims, multiple witnesses, Danielle corrected softly. She tore off the edge of her paper bag, memorized the number, then ate the note. We just need to survive the night. Through the small window high in the wall, the moon hung like a watchful eye. Around 3 a.m., a drunk man was brought in, shouting curses as Rick and Kyle shoved him into a cell down the hall. They roughed him up more than necessary, their laughter echoing. Then Rick turned toward the sisters' cells. How are our FBI superstars doing? He sneered, tapping his nightstick against the bars. Not feeling so tough now, huh? Danielle kept her eyes down, shoulders slumped. Dominique curled on her bunk facing the wall. Kyle laughed. Look at that. All that attitude's gone already. Maybe they're learning their place. About time, Rick agreed. Chief was right. They ain't so special after all. Their footsteps faded down the corridor, followed by the thud of a closing door. They're getting sloppy, Dominique whispered. Overconfident. Danielle nodded slightly. You saw the camera in the corner? It's fake. The red light's off. No recording system, Dominique confirmed. They don't want evidence of what happens here. That works both ways, Danielle said softly. They can't prove what we do either. The night stretched on. The desk sergeant checked occasionally, one of Holt's trusted men, judging by his smirk, but the sisters kept up their act. Heads bowed, shoulders slumped, quiet sniffles timed just right. Around 4 a.m., Rick and Kyle returned, their voices echoing down the hall. They were drunk, bourbon heavy on their breath. Just like that Thompson girl last month, Kyle said loudly. These ones think their fancy badges will save them. Badges don't mean nothing here, Rick laughed. Chief's got judges in his pocket clear to the county line. The sisters exchanged glances in the dim light. Each careless word was another piece of evidence. This wasn't random cruelty, it was systematic, organized, protected. Dawn crept closer. The morning shift would arrive soon. They had to stay smart. To everyone watching, they had to look exactly as expected. 2 more broken victims added to the list. Dominique moved closer to the bars, her voice barely above breath. They think we're broken. Let's use that. The first pale light slid across the concrete floor. The sisters lay still, pretending to sleep, every sense alert. Heavy footsteps echoed in the hall again. Bottles clinked. Rick's voice was first, lazy, smug. Man, I needed this after dealing with those stuck-up feds. Hell yeah, Kyle said. Bourbon makes everything better. Mark's slurred voice joined in. Remember that family on Oak Street last summer? The mother crying when we found that bag of pills in her kid's room. Danielle stayed still, her heartbeat steady. The hidden mic sewn into her bra strap, standard FBI issue, overlooked during the search, was recording every word. She adjusted slightly, making sure the audio was clear. That was classic, Rick chuckled. Kids swore they weren't his. But who's going to believe some black teenager over 3 cops? 5 years minimum, Kyle said proudly. Chief says we're doing God's work, Mark added. Told the mayor that at the fundraiser? Dominique's mind recorded everything. Names, dates, details, connections. The mother's tears. The planted evidence. The fundraiser tie-in. Speaking of cleaning up, Rick went on, scraping his chair against the floor. Remember the Williams family? 3 generations in that old house on Maple? Kyle laughed. Till we got creative with that property seizure. Now it's a fancy coffee shop. The development company sure was grateful, Mark added. That envelope Chief got wasn't exactly thin. More bourbon, more poison spilled, falsified reports, planted weapons, lost evidence, each confession another nail in their coffin. Danielle's jaw tightened. These weren't just bad cops. They were architects of destruction, systematically tearing apart black families, erasing futures, rewriting lives. And now every word was being captured. Kyle's voice rose again, sloppy and drunk. You remember that teacher? The one who filed that complaint about us roughing up her student? Rick laughed. 1 little bag of cocaine in her desk and suddenly she's not credible. Lost her license and everything. Chief called it preventive maintenance, Mark said with a cruel laugh. Can't have people thinking they can challenge us. Through barely open eyes, Dominique watched their reflections in the metal toilet. 3 men, badges pinned to their chests, drinking bourbon and laughing about ruined lives. She memorized every detail, their tone, their gestures, the hierarchy between them. Rick led, Kyle followed. Mark backed them up. Remember that grandmother last month? Kyle said, voice slurred. The one who kept filing complaints about police harassment? Yeah, Rick said, pride thick in his voice. Her grandson's doing 15 years now. Amazing what you can do with a little creativity and an unregistered gun, Mark said, and the others fell quiet. They all do eventually, Rick added. The talk slid into technical details. Which judges were theirs, which evidence lockers had blind spots, which desk sergeants would lose paperwork. Each sentence wove another thread in their web of corruption. A distant door opened. Bottles were hidden, chairs scraped back. Shift change soon, Rick muttered. Clear this out. What about them? Kyle nodded toward the cells. Look at them out cold, Rick said. By morning they'll beg to leave town, just like the rest. When the corridor cleared, Danielle opened her eyes. No words were needed. Dominique raised an eyebrow. Did you get it all? Danielle nodded minutely. Hours of drunken confessions, names, dates, crimes, captured in crisp digital quality. But one mistake, and that evidence would vanish. They had to get the recording out, had to reach Deputy Director Chen, had to protect the proof. They lay still as morning light crept in, bodies appearing broken, the exact image their captors wanted. Inside, their minds raced, planning without sound. Danielle shifted toward the bars. We've got them, she breathed. We just need the right moment. The morning shift brought fresh cruelty, officers parading by, some sneering, most indifferent. One face did stand out, Officer Jenny Morales. She waited until the hall cleared before sliding their bland trays through the slot. "Eat quickly," she whispered. "I can get you to a phone, but we have to time it perfectly." Danielle watched Morales for any sign of a trap. The young officer's hands trembled, risk taking its toll. "Why help us?" Dominique asked quietly. Morales glanced over her shoulder. "I've seen what they do. I'm tired of being part of it." She outlined the plan. The rarely used landline in the file room, the 10-minute gap at shift change, the camera blind spot behind the cabinets. "I'll create a distraction. You'll have maybe 5 minutes. Make it count." When shift change came, Morales's timing was perfect. A staged crash at the front desk, shouting about spilled coffee. Keys clicked. Morales led them down the back corridor to the dusty file room. Danielle dialed her supervisor's direct line with trembling fingers. 3 rings, then Keen's voice. "Keen. Sir, it's Agent Danielle Carter. We're being held. We have evidence." "Carter?" His tone shifted. "Where are you calling from?" "Local station. We have recordings." "Don't say another word," Keen cut in coldly. "Forget it. Drop this now while you still can." The line went dead. Betrayal hit like a physical blow. Dominique went rigid. They'd trusted Keen, and the system had turned on them. Morales hissed from the doorway. "Someone's coming! Move!" They barely made it back to their cells before heavy footsteps thundered down the hall. Rick's broad silhouette filled the corridor. He held up a phone, grinning. Well, he drawled. "Got an interesting call from your FBI boss. Says you're troublemakers. Says handle it locally." Dominique slammed her fists against the bars. The clang rang through the station like an alarm. Blood welled on her knuckles, but rage drowned the pain. Her eyes burned with a fury that made even Rick step back. But Danielle's response wasn't loud or frantic. It was quiet, razor-sharp and final. "Then we burned them all." The calm in her tone made his smirk fade for a heartbeat. It wasn't a desperate threat. It was a promise from someone who had nothing left to lose. Rick forced a laugh and walked away, but the sisters' eyes followed him like shadows. They had lost everything, their ally in the Bureau, their faith in the system, and every path except one, to take the whole corrupt machine down. Later that night, Morales slipped into their cell block, pretending to check restraints. "I have a message," she whispered. "Louise, the bartender, he has something. Hidden cameras. The night at the bar, he caught everything. But he needs help getting it out." Hope flickered in Dominique's eyes. "Can you arrange contact?" Morales nodded. "I know someone. Maya Green, investigative journalist. She's been after this story for years." The next day, Maya arrived under the pretense of interviewing the sisters. The guards let her in, thinking it was another hit piece. She was sharp-featured, calm, her pressed blazer out of place in the grimy interview room. As she adjusted her mic, she whispered, "Louise contacted me. I've seen the footage. But there's more. Judge Wilkes has been collecting evidence for years." "Clarence Wilkes?" Danielle asked softly. "The retired circuit judge?" Maya nodded. "He's been watching this for decades, waiting for someone brave enough to fight back." She pretended to jot notes for her article, but what she wrote made both sisters' eyes widen. "Meeting tonight. Wilkes's house. Louise bringing footage. I have files, police scanners, badge numbers, bank records." Dominique mouthed silently. "How?" Maya scribbled Morales. 2 hours during shift change. Critical window. The rest of the interview continued normally, but beneath it, a plan began to form. That evening, everything fell into place. Morales temporarily disabled the cameras. During shift change, the sisters were moved for questioning, and within minutes were in Maya's car, crouched low under blankets. She drove past the checkpoint, her press badge glinting under dim light. Judge Wilkes's house stood quiet among the oaks, dignified but modest. He opened the door himself, tall, steady, eyes heavy with the weight of justice long denied. "Welcome," he said simply. "We have much to discuss." Louise was already there, his laptop open, hands trembling with anger. "I have everything," he said. "Years of footage, cops bragging about planting evidence, beating suspects, extorting businesses." The judge nodded grimly. "And I have the records to prove it. Cases with sudden witness changes, unexplained evidence, ruined families. This is no accident. It's a machine built to protect itself. Maya spread her files across the table, bank accounts, offshore transfers, property deals. And the money trail leads straight into the bureau, she said quietly. Danielle's jaw tightened at the thought of Keen's betrayal. They worked through the night, linking patterns, cross-checking data, piecing together a map of corruption so vast it almost seemed unreal. Every folder told a story. Every record hid a life destroyed. "This isn't random," Dominique said. "Every person who spoke up, arrested, discredited, erased." "Systematic," the judge replied. "This is organized oppression." "But even machines break," Maya said. "And now we have proof." As dawn crept through the windows, Dominique looked at the piles of evidence and the faces around her. Her sister, the judge, the journalist, the bartender. All of them had risked everything. "We're not just fighting for us anymore," she said. "We're fighting for everyone," they silenced. They all nodded, a quiet unity forged in exhaustion and purpose. Maya hurried to her car, her briefcase heavy with evidence. The street was silent, the air thick with humidity. She didn't see the dark van until the doors flew open. 3 men in masks rushed her. She swung the case, hitting one hard, but they overpowered her. Fists landed. Her laptop shattered. "Should have stayed out of it," one sneered before they left her bleeding on the asphalt, briefcase gone. A driver found her 20 minutes later. By then, her ribs were cracked, her arm broken, her body barely holding on. Across town, Louise locked up his bar. He smelled smoke before he saw it, the back room engulfed in flames, the gasoline burning too fast, too clean. His laptop was inside, along with every backup file. He tried to reach it, but the heat was unbearable. The fire roared, swallowing years of proof. He staggered outside, coughing, just as fire trucks arrived too late. Across the street, Officer Rick Dalton watched from his car, smiling faintly. In their cells, Morales broke the news to the sisters, her face pale. "Maya's in intensive care," she whispered. "Louise's bar burned down, and they're saying, 'You arranged it.'" Danielle's fists tightened. "That's impossible." "They fabricated everything," Morales said. "New charges, conspiracy, arson, attempted murder. False witnesses, fake phone records. They're claiming outside accomplices." Chief Hall appeared soon after, baton tapping against the bars. "Quite a night," he sneered. "Shame about your friends." But that's what happens when people forget their place. He slid the paperwork through the slot. "You'll be transferred to maximum security tomorrow. Can't have arsonists here." Danielle read the files, fury trembling in her hands. Fake bank transfers, falsified logs, they planned this. Dominique scanned the papers. "The dates are off." They rushed it. "Doesn't matter," Danielle replied bitterly. "They own the system." Their dinner sat untouched. The cold sandwiches, the weak coffee. Maya knew too much, Dominique said quietly. "The offshore accounts." "And Louise had the proof," Danielle added. They silenced them both. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Rick and Kyle passed, laughing. "Sleep tight, ladies," Rick called. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "Hope you like prison food," Rick sneered before leaving. When the footsteps faded, Dominique moved closer to the bars. "What about Judge Wilkes? His records?" "Morales says his house was broken into this afternoon," Danielle replied. "Everything's gone." "They're thorough," Dominique said quietly. "I'll give them that." The sisters sat in silence as night settled over the jail. Somewhere a prisoner sobbed. Keys jingled in the corridor. "We knew they'd fight back," Dominique said finally. "But this," she gestured toward the new charges, "they're not even hiding it anymore. They're panicking." A cockroach scurried between their cells. Dominique watched it disappear into the wall. "Maya will recover," she said. "Louise will rebuild. We're not done." "No," Danielle agreed. "We're not, and neither are they." Through the narrow window, stars glimmered above, the same ones they'd watched as kids, dreaming of justice. Dominique reached through the bars. Danielle clasped her hand. "They're desperate," Danielle said firmly. "That means we're close." Their joined hands were a silent promise. Even in darkness, they weren't alone. The clatter of keys woke Danielle from uneasy sleep. 3 shadows loomed, Rick, Mark, and Kyle, faces twisted with cruel amusement. Rise and shine, FBI, Rick grinned, unlocking her door. Field trip time. Mark yanked Danielle to her feet. In the next cell, Kyle dragged Dominique out. Where are you taking us? Dominique demanded. Somewhere quiet, Rick said. Private. They were marched through empty corridors, bare feet cold against the floor. The night guard's desk was empty. Outside, a white van idled in the shadows. They were shoved inside. No seats, no windows, just darkness and the smell of oil. Rick drove, while Mark sat with them in the back. You know what your problem is? Rick called. You thought your badges made you untouchable. You came into my town digging up trouble. Your town? Danielle shot back. You mean your playground for abuse? Mark's backhand cracked across her face. Dominique growled, touch her again. You'll what? Kyle sneered. We own this county. Cops, judges, even your FBI boss. They all play by our rules. The van turned onto a dirt road, trees pressing close. Nobody knows where you are, Rick said. By morning, you'll just be missing persons. The sisters sat back to back, fingers brushing, a signal they'd used since childhood. Stay alert. After 20 minutes, the van stopped. The air smelled of swamp and decay. An abandoned warehouse stood ahead, windows shattered like hollow eyes. Home sweet home, Rick said. The gators will clean up when we're done. Inside, moonlight spilled through the broken roof. Rusted machines loomed in shadows. Perfect, Kyle muttered. No one's been here in years. Rick circled them slowly, savoring the fear. You know what I love about this job? Putting arrogant scum in their place, especially ones who think dark skin and a badge make them special. Is that what this is about? Danielle asked coldly. You can't stand seeing black women with authority. This is about respect, Rick snapped. Natural order, you mean? Dominique shot back. White men with badges doing whatever they want? Kyle kicked her legs out. Mark's boot pinned her down. Rick pulled his gun. Ever since you two walked into that bar acting superior, I've waited for this. We are better than you, Danielle said calmly. We protect people. You prey on them. Rage twisted Rick's face. He grabbed her hair, pressing the barrel to her temple. Any last words, FBI? Danielle stared straight ahead. What's wrong, Rick? Need a gun to feel powerful? His hand trembled, drunk and furious. Shut up. Or what? She hissed. You'll prove how small you are by killing an unarmed woman. Behind her, Dominique's fingers worked quietly, slipping a hair clip into the handcuff lock. You think you're smart? Rick growled. No, Danielle said. I think you're a coward. He stepped closer, face flushed. You should be afraid. Why? Because you've got a gun? That just proves how weak you are. Rick swung the gun to strike her, but Danielle ducked. The weapon whooshed past her ear. In the same breath, Dominique surged up, driving her elbow into Mark's gut. He folded with a grunt. Kyle lunged forward. Danielle's legs swept his ankle. He hit the concrete hard. Rick turned back, but Dominique's palm struck his wrist. His gun spun into the dark. Danielle's punch cracked against his jaw. Mark recovered, swinging wildly. The sisters moved in sync, training taking over. Dominique flipped him over her hip. He landed with a thud. Kyle staggered up, blood streaming. He raised a baton, but Danielle blocked, drove her knee into his groin, and dropped him again. Rick charged, swinging clumsily. The sisters dodged and countered, precise strikes to throat, ribs, kidneys. Not so tough without your gun, are you? Danielle taunted. Mark grabbed Dominique from behind. She slammed her head back, breaking his nose, then spun, kneeing his ribs. Kyle fumbled for pepper spray. Danielle kicked it away and dropped him with one clean punch. Rick managed one blow to Dominique's shoulder, but she spun, delivering a hard kick to his temple. He staggered, dazed. Mark pulled a backup gun, but Danielle was faster, twisting his wrist until bones snapped. The weapon clattered to the floor. His scream echoed through the warehouse walls. Through it all, the sisters moved like dancers in a deadly ballet, each anticipating the other's moves, creating openings, covering blind spots. Years of training and shared instincts made them devastating against the drunken, undisciplined cops. Rick tried to bull-rush Dominique, but she sidestepped smoothly, and his own momentum sent him crashing into a support beam with a resounding clang. He slumped to his knees, vision swimming. Kyle stirred weakly but stayed down, while Mark cradled his broken wrist, moaning in pain. Dominique retrieved Rick's dropped handcuffs, approaching him as he knelt dazed on the concrete. The metal clicked shut around his wrists, tight enough to bite. "Welcome to our world," she said coldly. "How does it feel to be helpless?" Danielle stood over him, her voice hard with triumph. "Checkmate." Rick's eyes were unfocused, blood trickling from a cut above his brow. The warehouse was silent except for harsh breathing and Kyle's quiet groans. The mighty sergeant, so full of swagger and menace just minutes before, now knelt defeated on the filthy floor. His own handcuffs bound him, while his backup lay unconscious or injured. The tables had turned completely. The sisters stood tall, breathing hard but victorious. Despite bruises and scrapes, they were unbroken. Their FBI training, combined with the strength born from years of facing down bullies and bigots, had proven superior to drunken brutality. Rick's head slumped forward in defeat. His bravado had finally shattered. The natural order he bragged about had been upended. The predator had become prey. Danielle pulled a small device from her boot, a modified body camera that had survived the pat-downs. With practiced hands, she activated the FBI uplink system, its tiny red light blinking to life. "What's that?" Rick slurred, squinting at the light through his bloody haze. "Your confession booth," Danielle said coldly. She positioned the camera carefully, making sure it captured all three officers. "Everything you say is streaming live to FBI servers and the internet." Rick's face twisted with rage. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Danielle held up her phone, showing the live feed. "Right now, thousands of people are watching, including your superiors." Kyle's eyes widened with sudden fear. "Turn it off." He tried to lunge forward but fell back, still dizzy from the fight. "Why?" Dominique asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Worried about people seeing the real you? The brave officers who kidnap women and threaten to kill them." Mark shook his head, cradling his broken wrist. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can," Danielle said. "Your phone GPS puts you here. The warehouse security cameras caught you dragging us inside." She smiled coldly. "And now we have you, Liv." Dominique circled behind Rick, her steps calm and deliberate. "Tell them about the other women, Rick, the ones you terrorized over the years. The evidence you planted, the lives you ruined." "I don't know what you're talking about," Rick spat, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "No?" Danielle moved closer, her voice hard. "What about Maria Rodriguez, the woman you planted drugs on before deporting her, separating her from her children? Or James Washington, the college student you framed for assault?" Rick's face paled. "That's all lies." "Then what about tonight?" Dominique pressed. "Tell the camera why you really arrested us. Was it because we broke any laws, or because we wouldn't let you grope us?" Across town, Officer Jenny Morales sat at her desk, carefully monitoring the live feed. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, sharing the stream to key social media platforms and news outlets. She had waited years for this moment, documenting the department's corruption in secret. Now finally the truth would come out. "You think you're so special?" Rick sneered at the camera, his drunken state loosening his tongue. "Coming into my town with your FBI badges, thinking you can change things. This is how it's always been, how it should be." "And how's that, Rick?" Danielle prompted, knowing he was about to hang himself with his own words. "Keeping people in their place," he shouted. These streets were peaceful before their kind started getting uppity, thinking they deserve rights, deserve respect. He spat the words like poison. Kyle tried to shut him up, but Rick was too far gone, too drunk and too angry to stop. "You know how many of them we've put away?" He laughed darkly. "Plant a little evidence here, rough them up there. They learn real quick who's in charge." Morales watched the viewer count explode as the feed spread. Local news stations picked it up first, then national outlets. The hashtag #Joshua started trending. She sent anonymous tips to journalists, ensuring the story couldn't be buried. "Tell them about the quotas, Rick," Dominique said quietly. "About targeting specific neighborhoods. Someone has to keep those areas in line," he growled. "Chief knows it. Department knows it. Hell, even your precious FBI knows it. Why do you think your supervisor warned us you were calling?" Danielle's eyes narrowed. "So, you admit Supervisor Keene is working with you?" Rick's drunken brain caught up too late. His face twisted in rage as he realized what he'd said. "You set me up," he screamed, struggling against the cuffs. "You tricked me." "No, Rick," Danielle said calmly. "We just gave you enough rope to hang yourself." "Everything you've said, that's your truth, your real face." The warehouse doors burst open as FBI tactical teams swarmed in, followed by state police. Morales had made sure the feed reached the right people. "This is all lies," Rick screamed into the camera as agents surrounded him. "They attacked us. They're the criminals." But the evidence was undeniable. The live stream had captured everything: his threats, his confessions, his racist rants. Millions had watched him expose the ugly truth behind his badge. The sisters stood side by side, watching coldly as Rick raved on, powerless. His authority was gone, stripped away by his own words and actions. The camera kept rolling, documenting his final meltdown for the world to see. "You're under arrest," a senior FBI agent announced, reading Rick his rights as other agents secured Kyle and Mark. "You can't do this to me." Rick thrashed against the cuffs. "I'm a police officer." "Not anymore," Dominique said softly. Danielle kept the camera steady, capturing every second. Across the internet, comments and shares exploded. The story was breaking wide open, and there would be no containing it this time. At the police station, Morales smiled grimly as she watched other officers scramble to control the damage. But it was too late. The truth was out, streaming across millions of screens. Rick's eyes locked onto the camera one last time, filled with impotent rage. "This is all lies," he screamed as agents led him away. The sisters simply stared back, their expressions cold and satisfied. Justice, so long denied, was finally being served. The morning sun blazed over the small town as federal vehicles swarmed the streets. Black SUVs and tactical units converged on the police station, their lights flashing against the brick walls. News vans lined the sidewalks, cameras rolling as the story that had exploded overnight continued to unfold. Chief Darnell Holt sat in his office, watching the chaos through his blinds. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the warehouse livestream went viral. Mayors, commissioners, reporters, all demanding answers he couldn't give. His carefully built empire of lies was crumbling. The door burst open. Federal agents flooded in, weapons drawn. "Chief Darnell Holt," the lead agent announced. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations." Holt's face stayed stoic as they cuffed him, but his hands trembled slightly. News cameras tracked his walk of shame through the station. Officers who had feared him for years now turned away, avoiding his gaze. Some were already speaking to investigators, desperate to save themselves. "No comment," Holt muttered as reporters shouted questions. But his image as the town's protector shattered with every camera flash. Across town at the FBI field office, Robert Keene's world imploded just as spectacularly. He sat rigid in his chair as internal affairs agents boxed up his awards and credentials. 25 years of service," he murmured quietly. "Gone because of those sisters." "Gone because you betrayed your badge," an agent corrected, dropping a thick indictment on his desk. "Conspiracy, obstruction, abuse of power. The evidence is overwhelming." Keene's face reddened. "I was protecting established relationships." "You were protecting corrupt cops who terrorized innocent people," the agent snapped. "And you did it for years." Outside, reporters captured Keene's disgrace as he was led out in handcuffs. His once polished appearance had crumbled. His tie hung loose, his hair disheveled. The man who had built his career on loyalty to power now had no one loyal to him. At the county jail, Rick, Mark, and Kyle were processed into cells, their badges and uniforms replaced with orange jumpsuits. Rick's face was plastered across every news channel, his drunken confessions replaying on loop. His hateful words had become a national symbol of police corruption. "My life is over," Kyle whimpered from his cell. "Should have thought about that before you helped kidnap federal agents," the guard replied coldly. Mark sat silently in his cell, cradling his broken wrist as the reality of his situation sank in. The power he once wielded so carelessly was gone. Now he was just another inmate, waiting for justice to grind him down. As federal agents combed through years of corrupt files, the town's residents took to the streets. What began as a small gathering outside the police station swelled into hundreds, then thousands. Black residents who had suffered silently for years finally found their voices. "No more fear," they chanted. "The Carter sisters showed the way." Mrs. Washington, mother of the college student Rick had framed, stood at the front of the crowd. "My boy lost 3 years of his life because of their lies," she told the cameras, tears streaming down her face. "But today the truth is finally out." Judge Wilkes addressed the protesters, his voice steady despite his age. "I saw the corruption from the bench," he said. "But they threatened anyone who spoke up. The Carter sisters did what many of us couldn't. They stood their ground and exposed the truth." Luis, the bartender whose secret recording had helped build the case, received a standing ovation. His bar might have burned, but his courage had sparked a revolution. Officer Jenny Morales walked out of the police station and turned in her badge. "I can't serve in a corrupt system," she announced. "It's time to rebuild from the ground up. The crowd parted as Danielle and Dominique emerged from the federal building. They refused to change clothes, still wearing the shorts and tops from that fateful night at the bar. Their bruises were visible, but their heads were held high. The sisters paused at the top of the steps, taking in the sight before them. Signs bearing their names waved above the crowd. Phones recorded their every move. But what struck them most were the faces full of hope, vindication, and long-awaited justice. "When they assaulted us in that bar," Danielle began, her voice carrying across the square, "they thought we'd be easy victims." "They were wrong." "But this isn't about us," Dominique added. "It's about every person they've terrorized, every life they've tried to destroy, every voice they tried to silence." The crowd roared in response. Elderly residents who remembered segregation wiped tears from their eyes. Young activists raised their fists in solidarity. The sisters had given them something precious, proof that the powerful could fall. Together, Danielle and Dominique descended the steps into the waiting crowd. People reached out to touch them, to thank them, to share their own stories of abuse at the hands of corrupt officers. Mrs. Washington hugged them tightly. "You gave us our dignity back," she whispered. The sisters moved through the crowd, accepting embraces and words of gratitude. They had come home to expose corruption and found a community ready to rise. Behind them, the rotten system they'd uncovered continued to crumble. But here, surrounded by the people they'd helped free, Danielle and Dominique Carter walked with their heads high, unbroken and unbowed. 3 weeks after the arrests, the old community hall buzzed with energy. Every wooden chair was filled, people standing along the walls and spilling into the hallway. The floorboards creaked beneath the weight of the crowd, and the evening light streamed through dusty windows, casting long shadows across eager faces. Maya Green stood at the podium, her notebook open before her. The bruises from her attack had faded, but her determination burned brighter than ever. She adjusted her glasses and looked out at the packed room. "Tomorrow, my full investigation hits the press," she announced firmly. 6 months of digging, hundreds of interviews, thousands of documents. We're exposing every false arrest, every planted evidence case, every act of brutality that was covered up. The crowd murmured, pain and vindication in equal measure. An elderly man in the front row nodded through tears. His grandson had spent 5 years in prison on fabricated charges. "The story doesn't end with Rick Dalton and his cronies," Maya continued, flipping through her notes. "We've uncovered a network of corruption spanning 3 decades. Judges who looked the other way, prosecutors who buried evidence, politicians who profited from our silence." She paused, meeting the eyes of the crowd. "But most importantly, this story is about you. The mothers who lost sons to false charges, the business owners who paid protection money, the witnesses who were threatened into silence. Your voices are finally being heard." Judge Clarence Wilkes rose from his seat, his tall frame still commanding respect. He made his way to the podium with slow, deliberate steps. "I sat on that bench for 30 years, he began, his deep voice filling the hall. I watched good people crushed by a system that was meant to protect them. Every time I tried to speak up, they threatened to destroy my family. He gripped the podium, his knuckles white. But those days are over. Chief Holt's network is exposed. His allies are scrambling to save themselves. Federal investigators are reopening hundreds of cases. His voice swelled with emotion.
This town is ours again.
The hall erupted with cheers and applause. People embraced, some weeping openly. Mrs. Washington stood, raising her son's college acceptance letter. He had been released and cleared of all charges, ready to rebuild his life. Officer Jenny Morales, now part of the federal task force, stepped up with updates. 17 officers have been indicted so far. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is establishing a permanent presence here. We're rebuilding the department from scratch with community oversight. Luis, still running his bar from a temporary spot while rebuilding, spoke next. When those officers attacked the Carter sisters, they thought it was just another abuse of power. Instead, it became their downfall. The crowd turned as Danielle and Dominique entered quietly from the back, making their way to the front. They moved through the audience, greeted by hugs and handshakes. Their presence commanded attention, not through fear, but through respect. Danielle took the podium first, her FBI badge glinting in the light. When we came home that night, we were just two sisters wanting a quiet drink, she said, her voice steady. What happened to us had happened to so many others. The only difference was we had the training and the means to fight back. She paused, looking out over the crowd. Justice is never given, she declared. It's fought for every day in every way possible. Sometimes with badges and courts, sometimes with cameras and protests, and sometimes with simple courage to speak truth to power. Dominique stepped beside her sister, their shoulders touching. The men who attacked us thought their badges made them untouchable, she said. They were wrong. No one is above the law, and no one is beneath justice. She smiled faintly, her tone soft but resolute. Tonight we fought for all of us, for every person they tried to break, every family they tried to destroy, every truth they tried to bury. The hall rose to its feet in thunderous applause. Young activists stood beside elders who had endured decades of silence. They were united in victory and in purpose. Maya returned to the podium, holding up advance copies of her exposé. Tomorrow, the entire country will know what happened here, she said. But more importantly, they'll know how we fought back, how a community found its voice and demanded better. Judge Wilkes nodded solemnly. This isn't just about punishing the guilty, he said. It's about building something better, a justice system that serves everyone equally, a police force that protects, not terrorizes, a community where truth matters more than power. As the meeting wound down, people lingered, sharing stories and plans for the future. The sisters stood side by side, watching it all unfold. They had broken decades of silence, but the real power now rested with the people who had finally found their strength. As night settled, Danielle and Dominique stepped out of the hall. The street was quiet, but not with fear. This was a peaceful quiet, the kind that comes after truth has triumphed over lies. Side by side, they walked into the darkness, their footsteps echoing softly on the pavement. Behind them, the corrupt system they'd exposed sat behind bars, its power broken. The fight for justice would never truly end. But in this town, at least, the silence had been shattered forever. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the meantime, I've handpicked 2 stories I think you'll love. Have a great day.